Don't forget, you can reach the latest episode of Potomac Watch anytime. Just ask your smart speaker, play the Opinion Potomac Watch podcast.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome back. Meantime, another parting gift from Joe Biden to the public. On Monday, he issued an order to put off limits for oil and gas leasing about 625 million acres of offshore waters. President citing the 1953 Outer Continental Shelf Lands Act. The statement from the White House says that this protects the entire U.S. East Coast, the eastern Gulf of Mexico, the Pacific off of Washington, Oregon, and California, as well as portions of the northern Bering Sea in Alaska. President Biden citing the climate crisis as the need to do this. Alicia, what do you make of this, and particularly the argument from the White House that this is a permanent removal of these waters from any potential future oil and gas leasing?
Right. So the practical immediate effect won't be much, since almost all of these waters are currently off limits based on previous presidential orders. And that included one by Donald Trump in the run-up to the 2020 election that basically limited drilling or new leasing off of Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, and Florida, as well as Virginia. And this was to appease Republicans, ironically, in those states who wanted political protection from attacks by Democrats about offshore drilling. But long term, this could have a major impact on U.S. production, because eventually the U.S. will need to expand and open up more areas for leasing. Now, going back to, would you say, could a future president undo this in this question? Biden is saying that no, it's his order is permanent, which is actually very different than even Donald Trump's orders or Barack Obama's or George W. Bush. Almost every president has actually limited to some extent new leasing off the coast. Now, the reason why this is different is, again, it doesn't even specify any duration. Now, in 2019, a judge held that when Trump tried to reverse some of Obama's, and again, Obama's was actually phrased somewhat differently than Biden's is. Biden's actually is very just carte blanche, permanent. But even then, in 2019, a federal judge held that Trump couldn't do it because the law doesn't expressly provide the authority to reverse a withdrawal. And I think that is a really illegally dubious proposition. The idea that one president can bind all of his future successors for eternity. And if this question were to get up to the Supreme Court, I imagine that the Trump administration would win. But it is an unsettled legal question.
Maybe coming, though, to a court near you rather quickly. Here is President Trump on Tuesday saying that this order from President Biden won't last very long.
They took away 625 million acres of offshore drilling. Nobody else does that. And they think they have it, but we'll put it back. I'm going to put it back on day one. I'm going to have it revoked on day one. We'll go immediately if we need to. I don't think we should have to go to the courts, but if we do have to go to the courts, they try to be sneaky. They go in and they sign. Remember, this is a man that said he wants the transition to be smooth.
The provision in the law says that the president may, from time to time, withdraw from disposition any of the unleased lands of the Outer Continental Shelf. And Kim, the argument then is that Congress gave the president power to withdraw those lands. It didn't give him explicitly the power to put those lands back into the oil and gas leasing program. But it does seem to me that if one president can issue an order, the next president can withdraw the order.
Yeah, I'd just like to put this briefly, though, in some perspective. I think we were just talking, when we were talking about the CFIUS ruling, about the problems with precedents that presidents set. And, I actually put this at the feet. George H.W. Bush was the first to use this. These presidents, every time they're headed out of office, it's like a vanity project. They want to be able to say, look, I put this little bit of land off and I preserved it. And, then they get credit for the rest of their whole whatever. But it's been expanded. And this was always the risk of this. It's a somewhat obscure provision, Section 12A of this 1953 Act. It was used then. It was been used by subsequent presidents, but unsurprisingly, Democratic presidents in particular have ramped up their use of it. I mean, Obama, one of his final departing gifts was essentially to shut off all drilling in the Arctic, which was pretty sweeping. That was what Trump tried to revoke when he came in and was ultimately sued. Now we have Joe Biden, 625 million acres acres. I mean, this is the entire eastern seaboard, the entire Pacific, California, Oregon, and Washington, the eastern Gulf of Mexico, the North Bering Sea. It's ridiculous. And it's also ridiculous, as Alicia said, the notion that somehow a president can make such a decision and bind all future presidents to that decision. I think the only reason it wasn't reversed before is you had this federal judge, by the way, a federal judge in Alaska, who doesn't have the greatest track record on some of these rulings as well, too. And it was getting appealed to the Ninth Circuit, but then Biden won the election, and so the Ninth Circuit dismissed the case. I think that it had gone to the Supreme Court. We'd have clarity on that now, and I kind of wish that had happened. But I think this is pretty straightforward legally if it goes back up to the Supreme Court, despite what many in the mainstream media are saying. I would also note there's an opportunity here for this incoming Congress to do something through reconciliation. One thing they could potentially do is simply override Biden's order and put leases up for auction in these restricted areas. That is Congress ruling and mandating that there must be work done in these areas. Congress could also try to come together and also change that provision or reverse some of this in law. That would be harder given the filibuster. But Republicans are not without tools here. One question will be was if they put aside their NIMBYism, especially those in Florida and North Carolina, South Carolina, and understand that certain parts of the country shouldn't just be walled off because they believe it should.
Politically, though, it is one of those problems of a long lame duck period that we have in the U.S. Election in early November, transition of power not until January 20th. It gives the outgoing president a lot of time to scour the statute books, the regulatory books, looking for opportunities to do a final midnight move to try to cement some of his legacy. And Alicia, we'll give you the last word, but maybe not the last time we will have occasion to make that point before we get to Inauguration Day on January 20th.
Right. I mean, the new rules are actually coming pretty fast and furious from some of the agencies. Just today, the CFPB basically banned medical debt from being considered as part of credit files and your credit scores. The administration is also currently behind closed doors reworking some previous free trade agreements in quote unquote side letters and then trying to present them to Congress as fait accompli. And it's doing this across the board. And I do think that this also, to Kim's point, sets a precedent. This is what Biden is doing now. Well, what could Trump do in his lame duck term? And I imagine you'll get similar overreaches.
Thank you, Alicia. Thank you, Kim. Thank you all for listening. You can email us at pwpodcast@wsj.com. If you like the show, please hit that subscribe button, and we'll be back tomorrow with another edition of Potomac Watch.